The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the dusty general store, and Catherine Walsh stepped out into the blazing New Mexico sun. Her leather-bound books clutched protectively against her chest as the driver tossed her trunk onto the parched ground without ceremony. It was July of 1878, and Roswell looked exactly like what she had been warned about back in Boston. A collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence in an unforgiving land, where education was considered a luxury nobody could afford. Catherine adjusted her spectacles and smoothed her traveling dress, acutely aware of the curious stares from the handful of people on the street. At 23, she had graduated from one of the finest women's colleges in Massachusetts, fluent in Latin, Greek, French, and Spanish, with a passion for mathematics and literature that her family had encouraged. Her father, a university professor, had instilled in her a love of learning that burned brighter than any frontier sun. But her father was gone now, claimed by pneumonia the previous winter, and her mother had remarried a man who made it clear there was no place for an unmarried, overeducated daughter in his household. The advertisement had seemed like Providence. Teacher wanted for frontier town. Room and board provided, must be of good moral character. She had written immediately, not mentioning the extent of her education, knowing it might work against her. The response had been swift and desperate. They needed someone who could read and write. That would be enough. Except now, standing in the relentless heat with dust coating her fine boots, Catherine wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "You the new schoolteacher?" A woman's voice, rough with sun and wind, cut through her thoughts. Catherine turned to see a weathered woman in a faded calico dress, her face lined with hard living but her eyes kind. "Yes, I am, Catherine Walsh, Mary Henderson. I run the boarding house where you will be staying. Come on, let me help you with that trunk. The school board will want to meet you this evening." Mary bent to grab one handle of the trunk, and Catherine quickly took the other. As they made their way down the rutted street, Mary talked in a steady stream about the town, the people, the challenges. "Most folks here cannot read beyond their own names. The children work from sunup to sundown on their family spreads. Getting them to school even a few hours a week is like pulling teeth. But there are some who want better for their young ones. Zane Zimmerman, he is one of those." "Zane Zimmerman?" Catherine asked, stepping carefully around a pile of horse droppings. "Runs the biggest cattle operation within 50 miles. His wife died giving birth to their second child 3 years back. He has been raising those kids alone with help from his ranch hands. 2 boys. Matthew is 9 and Jacob is 6. Smart as whips, both of them, but wild as mustangs. Zane wants them educated proper, says he will not have his sons grow up ignorant of the world beyond cattle and dust." They reached a modest 2-story structure that looked newer than most of the buildings. Mary pushed open the door and blessed coolness washed over them. "We built this place just 2 years ago. You will have a room upstairs, all to yourself. Meals are included, but I expect you to help with dishes and such. Fair, more than fair. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Mary, please, out here we do not stand on ceremony much." She led Catherine up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "Rest up. I will send word you have arrived. The school board meeting is at 7 at the church." Left alone, Catherine unpacked her trunk carefully, arranging her precious books on the simple wooden shelf beside the bed. Homer and Virgil in the original languages, Shakespeare and Austen, mathematical texts by Euclid and Newton. Her father's personal copy of John Stuart Mill's philosophical works. Each volume represented a part of her soul, a connection to a world that felt increasingly distant. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into a fresh dress of sensible brown cotton, and sat on the bed to wait. Through the window, she watched the town go about its business. Cowboys rode past, their spurs jangling. Women hurried along with baskets. Children darted between buildings, barefoot and brown as berries. Everything moved to a slower rhythm than Boston, yet with an urgency born of survival rather than social obligation. At 6:30, Mary called up the stairs. "Time to go, Catherine." The church was a simple wooden structure with rough-hewn pews and a cross carved from local pine. 5 men waited inside, their faces showing various degrees of skepticism as Catherine entered. Mary made the introductions. The preacher, the general store owner, the blacksmith, the bank manager, and Zane Zimmerman. Catherine's breath caught as she met Zane's eyes. He stood a head taller than the other men, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor and sun-darkened skin that made his gray eyes startling in their clarity. He wore his dark hair longer than was fashionable back east, touching his collar, and his face was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jaw and a mouth that looked more accustomed to frowning than smiling. He was perhaps 27 or 28, and despite the dust on his boots and the sweat-stained hat in his hands, he carried himself with a quiet authority that made the other men defer to him. "Miss Walsh." The preacher spoke first, his voice nasal and thin. "We received your letter stating you had completed normal school and were qualified to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. Is this correct?" "Yes, Reverend." Catherine kept her voice steady, sensing that now was not the time to reveal the full extent of her credentials. "Can you maintain discipline? The children here are not like city children. They are rough, unmannered. Many do not want to be in school at all. I believe education should inspire curiosity rather than require constant punishment. If I can show the children that learning opens doors to worlds beyond what they know, discipline will follow naturally." The blacksmith snorted. "Fancy talk. Can you use a switch when needed?" Before Catherine could answer, Zane spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, measured, with a slight drawl that turned his words into something almost musical. "What my children need is not more hitting. They get enough of hard knocks from life itself. What they need is someone who can show them that there is more to existence than dirt and cattle. Someone who can teach them to think." The other men shifted uncomfortably. The store owner cleared his throat. "Now, Zane, we all agreed that basic education is what is needed here. 3 articles and nothing more. We cannot have someone filling these kids' heads with ideas that will make them dissatisfied with frontier life." Zane's jaw tightened, and Catherine saw a flash of something fierce in those gray eyes. "And I am paying more than half the cost of this school, so I reckon my opinion carries weight." "Miss Walsh, may I ask you a question directly?" "Of course, Mr. Zimmerman." "My Matthew, he asks me questions I cannot answer. About the stars, about why things are the way they are, about history and geography and all manner of things. If I send him to you, will you answer his questions? Will you teach him everything you know, not just what these men think is proper for a frontier boy?" The room fell silent. Catherine felt the weight of the moment, understanding that her answer would determine not just whether she got this position, but what kind of teacher she would be allowed to be. She met Zane's gaze and saw genuine hunger there, not for her personally, but for knowledge, for opportunity, for his children to have what he perhaps had been denied. "Mr. Zimmerman, I believe that every child deserves access to the full breadth of human knowledge, limited only by their capacity and interest to learn. If your son asks about the stars, I will teach him astronomy. If he asks about history, I will teach him about the rise and fall of civilizations. If he wants to know why things are the way they are, I will teach him philosophy and science. I will teach all the children everything I know, for as long as they want to learn." The preacher stood abruptly. "This is precisely what I was afraid of. She's going to fill their heads with nonsense. Latin and Greek and philosophy have no place on the frontier. Perhaps that is why the frontier remains as it is." Catherine heard the words leave her mouth before she could stop them, and she saw Mary wince. "Forgive me, but I must speak plainly. Education is not the enemy of frontier life. It is the foundation upon which civilization is built. You want this town to grow, to prosper, to become more than a dusty collection of buildings. Then you need educated citizens who can read contracts, understand law, keep accurate records, and think critically about the challenges they face." "She is too educated for this place," the bank manager said flatly. "She will last a month before she runs back east." Zane set his hat on a pew with a deliberate motion that drew every eye. "I will make you all a bargain. Give Miss Walsh 1 term, 3 months. If at the end of that time the children are not learning, if she cannot manage them, or if she runs away, then we will find someone else. But if she succeeds, you will give her free rein to teach as she sees fit." "Agreed." The men looked at each other. Finally, the preacher nodded. "Agreed. But she must teach Sunday school as well, and we will have no inappropriate behavior." "My conduct will be beyond reproach," Catherine said firmly. "You have my word." The meeting concluded with practical matters. She would receive $15 per month. School would run from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 6 days a week, and she was to use the room attached to the church as her schoolhouse. It was not much, but it was hers. As the men filed out, Zane lingered. Up close, he was even more imposing, but his expression had softened. "Thank you, Miss Walsh. You said what I have been thinking for years but could not put into proper words. I simply told the truth, Mr. Zimmerman. Though I fear I may have made my position here more precarious. Call me Zane, please, and do not worry about them. They bluster and complain, but they know this town needs a school. My boys will be there first thing Monday morning. I wanted to ask." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "Would you be willing to come to the ranch on Sunday afternoon? I would like you to meet Matthew and Jacob properly, get a sense of what they know already, what they need to learn. I know it is your day of rest, but I would consider it a great favor." Catherine should have said no. It was improper to visit a widower's home unchaperoned, but something in his earnest expression, in the hope she saw in his eyes, made her nod. "I would be happy to, Zane. What time would be convenient?" 2 o'clock. "I will send a wagon to fetch you from Mary's. The ranch is about 5 miles out." That night, Catherine lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town. Someone playing a fiddle in a distant saloon, horses whinnying, the wind rustling through dry grass. She thought about Zane Zimmerman and his fierce determination to give his sons an education. She thought about the challenge ahead, teaching children who had never known the luxury of learning for learning's sake. Most of all, she thought about the preacher's words. "She is too educated for this place." Perhaps she was. But perhaps this place needed someone who was too educated, someone who believed that knowledge was not a luxury, but a necessity, even here in the harsh beauty of the New Mexico territory. Sunday morning, Catherine attended services and taught her first Sunday school class to a group of squirming children who clearly would rather be anywhere else. She kept the lesson simple and engaging, telling them stories from the Bible with enough dramatic flair that even the most restless child paid attention. Afterward, several mothers approached her with shy smiles, thanking her for making their children actually listen. At precisely 2 o'clock, a wagon pulled up in front of the boarding house. To Catherine's surprise, Zane himself held the reins, and two young boys sat in the back, barely containing their excitement. "Miss Walsh." Zane climbed down and offered his hand to help her up to the seat beside him. His hand was calloused and strong, his grip careful, and Catherine felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the contact. "These are my sons," Zane said as he guided the horses out of town. "Matthew is the older one. Jacob is the scamp with dirt on his nose." "I do not have dirt on my nose," Jacob protested, immediately rubbing his face and spreading the smudge. Matthew, a serious-looking boy with his father's gray eyes, leaned forward. "Miss Walsh, is it true you know Latin? Papa said you might know Latin." "It is true. I studied Latin for 8 years." "Can you really read what the Romans wrote? In their own words?" Catherine turned in her seat to see Matthew's face alight with curiosity. "I can. Would you like to learn? Could I? Papa said maybe you could teach me, but the Reverend said Latin was dead and useless." "Latin is the foundation of many modern languages and the language of science, law, and medicine. It is far from useless." She glanced at Zane, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed pleasure. "If your father approves, I would be happy to teach you." "Please, Papa." Matthew's reserve cracked, revealing the eager boy beneath. "That is why I asked Miss Walsh to come out here today," Zane said softly, "so we could talk about such things properly." The ranch, when they arrived, was more substantial than Catherine had expected. A sturdy house with a covered porch, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals holding dozens of cattle. Ranch hands moved about their business, tipping their hats to her as Zane helped her down from the wagon. The house interior was clean but sparse, with furniture that was practical rather than decorative. Zane saw her taking it in and gave a self-deprecating smile. "My wife, Sarah, she had plans to fix it up nice. After she passed, I just kept things as they were. The boys and I manage well enough." "It is a good home," Catherine said honestly. "Strong and well built. That matters more than fancy curtains." Zane looked at her with something like gratitude, and Catherine realized he had been bracing himself for criticism, for judgment about his housekeeping or his parenting or his life. She felt a surge of empathy for this man who was doing his best alone. They sat at the kitchen table, and Zane poured coffee while the boys brought out slates and the few books they owned. For the next 2 hours, Catherine assessed what they knew and what they were capable of learning. Matthew read haltingly, but could sound out complex words with effort. He had a natural aptitude for mathematics, quickly grasping concepts she presented. Jacob was younger and more restless, but bright, and he had memorized dozens of folk songs and could recite them perfectly. "They are remarkable," Catherine said finally, after the boys had run outside to do their chores. "Matthew has the mind of a scholar. With proper guidance, he could attend university one day. Jacob has an excellent memory and musical intelligence. They have barely scratched the surface of what they are capable of." Zane sat across from her, his coffee forgotten. "I knew it. I knew they were special, not just because they are mine, but because I could see it. The way Matthew studies everything, asks questions about how things work. The way Jacob remembers every story he has ever heard. But I cannot teach them what I do not know myself. What is your own education, if I may ask? My father believed in work, not books. I learned to read and write and cipher, but that is all. Everything else I have picked up as I could, but there are gaps you could drive a herd through." He met her eyes directly. "I want more for my sons. I want them to have choices I never had. If they want to stay and ranch, that is good and fine. But if they want to be doctors or lawyers or teachers or anything else, I want them to have that chance." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. That is the greatest gift a parent can give a child, opportunity. "Will you help me give them that? I will do everything in my power." Zane reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and gentle. "Thank you, Catherine. May I call you Catherine?" "Yes." Her voice came out softer than intended. "Please do." They sat like that for a moment, hands joined across the rough wooden table, and Catherine felt the first stirrings of something she had never experienced before. Attraction, yes, but more than that. Recognition. A sense that she had found someone who understood what mattered to her, who valued the things she valued. Zane seemed to feel it too, because he released her hand quickly, clearing his throat and standing. "I should get you back to town before dark. People talk." "Let them talk," Catherine said, surprising herself. "I am here to teach, not to please gossips." A slow smile spread across Zane's face, transforming it from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. "I am beginning to think you are exactly what this town needs, even if they do not know it yet." School began Monday morning with 11 students ranging in age from 5 to 14. They filled the small room attached to the church, sitting on rough benches and watching Catherine with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. She had spent the previous day preparing, arranging her few supplies, writing out lesson plans, steeling herself for the challenge. Matthew and Jacob sat in the front row, scrubbed clean and clearly instructed to be on their best behavior. Behind them, the other children whispered and fidgeted. Catherine stood before them and made a decision. She would not begin with rules and discipline and threats. She would begin with wonder. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Miss Walsh, and I am going to tell you something that might surprise you. You are all sitting on a giant ball that is hurtling through space at tremendous speed, circling a star that is so large that over 1,000,000 Earths could fit inside it." The whispers stopped, every eye fixed on her. "That star, which we call the sun, is just one of countless millions of stars in a great spiral of light called the Milky Way galaxy. And that galaxy is just one of countless galaxies stretching out into infinity. You, sitting here in this small room in Roswell, New Mexico, are part of something vast and magnificent and mysterious." A girl in the back raised her hand tentatively. "How do you know that?" "Because people studied the sky. They asked questions. They learned mathematics and used it to calculate distances and sizes. They refused to simply accept that things were as they appeared. They wanted to understand." Catherine leaned forward. "And I am here to teach you to do the same thing, to ask questions, to seek answers, to understand your world and your place in it." She saw it then, the spark of interest kindling in eyes that had expected boredom and rote memorization. Even the oldest boy, a lanky 14-year-old named Thomas who had come prepared to make trouble, leaned forward slightly. "Now," Catherine continued, "before we can explore the universe, we need tools. The ability to read, to write, to calculate, to think logically. So we will start with fundamentals. But I promise you, everything we learn will be in service of understanding something fascinating." The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were devoted to reading and writing, with Catherine tailoring lessons to each student's level. Afternoons focused on arithmetic and natural philosophy, what she called science. She taught them about the water cycle by studying the rare rains. She taught them about geology by examining the rocks around town. She taught them about biology by observing the plants and animals that survived in the harsh climate. The children responded beyond her wildest hopes. They began arriving early, eager to see what lesson she had planned. They lingered after school to ask questions. Even Thomas, who had been prepared to dismiss education as useless, became fascinated with mathematics when Catherine showed him how it could be used to calculate fair prices for cattle and prevent being cheated. Matthew flourished. Within 2 weeks, He was reading at a level far beyond his age. Catherine began teaching him Latin, starting with simple vocabulary and grammar. He absorbed it like dry earth soaking up rain. Jacob, though younger, showed remarkable progress in his own way, turning lessons into songs that helped the younger children memorize facts. But it was not just the children who were learning. Catherine found herself being educated in the ways of frontier life. Mary taught her to make bread that could withstand the dry climate. The mothers of her students showed her how to mend clothes and preserve food. The local Apache who traded in town taught her which plants had medicinal properties. She was learning that education flowed in multiple directions, and that her degrees did not make her superior, just differently informed. Zane came to town every Wednesday and Saturday, ostensibly to pick up supplies and collect his sons, but Catherine noticed he always found time to stop by the school. He would lean against the door frame, watching her teach with an intensity that made her skin warm. After class, they would talk while the boys gathered their things. "You are remarkable with them," Zane said one Wednesday afternoon, 6 weeks into the term. "I have never seen children so eager to learn. They were always eager. They just needed someone to show them that learning could be exciting rather than tedious. Matthew told me yesterday that he wants to be an astronomer. He wants to study the stars." Catherine felt a pang of concern. "And how do you feel about that?" "Proud, terrified, hoping I can figure out how to make it possible." Zane stepped into the empty classroom, his hat in his hands. "Catherine, I have been wanting to ask you something. Would you come to dinner at the ranch this Saturday? I know it is not proper without a chaperone, but Mary could come along if that would make it acceptable." Catherine should have said no. In the 6 weeks since she arrived, she had been scrupulously proper, never giving anyone cause to gossip. But she was tired of propriety. Tired of living according to rules that seemed designed to prevent human connection rather than facilitate it. "I would love to come to dinner, Zane, and I do not need Mary to chaperone. I am an adult woman capable of making my own decisions." His smile was radiant. "Saturday at 6, then. I will cook. Nothing fancy, but I promise it will be edible." That Saturday, Catherine borrowed a dress from Mary, a soft blue cotton that was simpler than her Boston clothes but somehow felt more right. She took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a softer style than her usual severe bun. When she saw her reflection, she barely recognized herself. Her face had tanned despite her bonnet, and her eyes seemed brighter. The frontier was changing her, and she found she did not mind. Zane arrived at exactly 6, driving the wagon with the boys bouncing excitedly in the back. "Miss Walsh, Papa made fried chicken," Jacob announced, "and biscuits." The evening was magical. Zane had set the table with what were clearly his best dishes, and he had even picked wildflowers for a centerpiece. The food was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Matthew told her about a constellation he had identified, and Jacob sang a new song he had composed about arithmetic. After dinner, the boys played outside while Catherine helped Zane clean up. "They love you," Zane said quietly, his hands in the dishwater. "They have not been this happy since their mother died. They are wonderful boys. You have done an amazing job raising them alone. It has been hard. Some nights I lie awake wondering if I am failing them, if they would be better off with a mother with a proper family." Catherine put down the dish she was drying and turned to him. "Zane, your sons are kind, curious, well-mannered, and deeply loved. You have not failed them. You have given them everything that truly matters." He turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. They were standing very close in the small kitchen, and Catherine could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "You have given me hope," he said softly. "Hope that I am doing right by them. Hope that there is more to life than just surviving day to day. Hope that maybe. He trailed off, but his eyes said what his words did not. Hope that maybe what? Catherine whispered. That maybe I could feel something again. After Sarah died, I thought that part of me was dead too. But then you arrived with your books and your passion for teaching and your absolute refusal to accept limitations, and I started to feel alive again. Catherine's heart was pounding. Zane, Papa, Miss Walsh, come see the sunset. Jacob's voice broke the moment, and they stepped apart quickly. But as they walked outside to admire the spectacular colors painting the New Mexico sky, Zane's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The boys were too absorbed in the sunset to notice, and Catherine allowed herself to simply feel. The warmth of his hand, the beauty of the landscape, the rightness of this moment. On the ride back to town, with the boys dozing in the back of the wagon, Zane said, Catherine, I know this is probably too soon, and I know you could have any man you wanted, someone educated and cultured from back east. But I need you to know that my intentions toward you are serious. I am courting you if you will allow it. Catherine felt joy bubble up inside her. I am allowing it. More than allowing it. I am welcoming it. And for the record, I do not want someone from back east. I want someone who values education not for status but for the doors it opens. Someone who loves his children enough to want the world for them. Someone who has shown me that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person. Zane stopped the wagon right there on the dark road and kissed her, softly at first, then with growing passion. Catherine had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts by university boys who thought themselves sophisticated. This was nothing like those kisses. This was fire and tenderness, hunger and patience, a promise and a question all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jacob's sleepy voice came from the back. Are you and Miss Walsh getting married, Papa? Zane laughed, the sound joyful and free. Would you like that, Jacob? Yes. Then she could teach us all the time and make those good biscuits and read us stories every night. Matthew, are you awake back there? Zane called. Yes, Papa. Matthew's voice was more reserved but no less pleased. I think Miss Walsh would make a good mother. Our mother, I mean. If she wanted to be. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. I would be honored, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But perhaps we should take our time, get to know each other properly. We will, Zane agreed, starting the wagon moving again. But I want you to know, Catherine Walsh, that I am going to marry you. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but soon. Because I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The 3-month trial period ended in October, and the school board had no choice but to acknowledge that Catherine had exceeded every expectation. Attendance had increased to 18 students. Every child had shown measurable improvement in reading and arithmetic. Several of the older students were now helping their parents with bookkeeping and correspondence. The town was beginning to see the value of education in practical, tangible ways. The preacher tried to object to some of Catherine's methods, particularly her teaching of scientific principles that seemed to contradict a literal interpretation of Scripture. But Zane, backed by several other parents, firmly stated that education meant exposure to different ideas, and that faith strong enough to matter could withstand questions. Catherine was given a permanent position at $18 per month, a significant increase. More importantly, she was given freedom to develop her own curriculum. She immediately began planning more advanced lessons for her brightest students while ensuring the younger ones had solid fundamentals. Her relationship with Zane deepened as autumn progressed. He came to town 3 times a week now, and they took walks together in the evening, properly chaperoned by Matthew and Jacob. They talked about everything, books and ranching, philosophy and cattle prices, dreams and practical realities. Catherine taught Zane poetry, reading him Wordsworth and Keats by lamplight. Zane taught Catherine to ride, patiently correcting her seat and praising her progress. On a crisp November evening, Zane asked Catherine to take a walk with him alone. Mary agreed to watch the boys, giving Catherine a knowing wink. Zane led her to a spot just outside town where a large cottonwood tree grew beside a small stream, its leaves golden in the fading light. "I brought you here for a reason," Zane said, taking both her hands in his. "This is where I proposed to Sarah 15 years ago. She was 16 and I was 18, and we thought we had our whole lives ahead of us." Catherine felt a flash of jealousy, then immediately felt ashamed. Sarah had been his wife, the mother of his children. Zane continued, "I loved Sarah. She was my first love, and I will always cherish her memory. But she has been gone 3 years, and life is for the living. I have been alone long enough. My boys have been without a mother long enough, and I have fallen deeply, completely in love with you." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket. "This was my grandmother's ring. Sarah wore it, but before she died, she told me that when I found love again, I should give it to that woman. She wanted me to be happy, Catherine. She wanted the boys to have a mother. And I know with absolute certainty that she would have loved you." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "Catherine Walsh, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and a mother to my sons? Will you build a life with me here in this harsh, beautiful land?" Catherine's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, yes to all of it. I love you, Zane Zimmerman. I love your sons. I love the life we can build together." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her thoroughly, and Catherine felt every doubt, every fear, every uncertainty melt away. This was right. This was where she belonged. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church where Catherine taught, surrounded by her students and their families, the ranch hands from Zane spread, and half the town. Mary cried throughout the ceremony. Matthew and Jacob stood up as Zane's best men, so proud in their Sunday best that Catherine's heart ached with love for them. The preacher who had doubted her performed the ceremony with surprising warmth, acknowledging that Catherine had proven herself a valuable addition to the community. As Zane kissed his bride, cheers erupted from the assembled crowd. The reception was held at the boarding house, with everyone bringing food to share. It was nothing like the elaborate society weddings Catherine had attended in Boston, but it was infinitely more meaningful. These people had become her community, her friends, her family. As the sun set and the dancing began, Zane pulled Catherine aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Zimmerman, Mrs. Zimmerman." Catherine loved the sound of it. More than ready. They rode to the ranch in the wagon, with Matthew and Jacob chattering excitedly about all the changes that would come with having Catherine living with them. She had already moved most of her belongings out to the ranch over the past week, and Zane had surprised her by adding a room to the house, a library where she could keep her books and prepare lessons. That night, after the boys were asleep, Zane carried Catherine over the threshold of their bedroom. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Catherine had been nervous, her education not having covered practical matters of marriage, but Zane was gentle and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Afterward, lying in his arms, Catherine felt a peace she had never known. "I was told I was too educated for frontier life," she murmured against his chest, "that I would not last here." Zane's arms tightened around her. "You are not too educated. This place was not educated enough, but we are changing that together." Marriage agreed with Catherine. She continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week while Zane watched the boys on the ranch the other 3 days. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it worked. On her teaching days, Catherine stayed with Mary, and on her ranch days, she taught Matthew and Jacob advanced lessons in the afternoon and helped with ranch bookkeeping in the evening. She discovered she had a talent for managing accounts, and under her guidance, the ranch's profits increased substantially. She implemented a system of record keeping that allowed them to track expenses and income precisely, identifying which cattle brought the best prices and which expenses could be reduced. But her greatest joy came from watching Matthew and Jacob flourish. Matthew was now reading in Latin and had begun studying Greek. He had taught himself basic astronomy using books Catherine ordered from back east, and he spent hours mapping the stars. Jacob had developed into quite a singer and had begun writing his own songs, incorporating mathematical concepts into catchy tunes that made learning easier for the younger children at school. The townspeople's attitudes toward education began to shift. When Thomas, the formerly rebellious 14-year-old, helped his father avoid being cheated on a land deal by carefully reading the contract, people took notice. When 2 of Catherine's students went on to attend normal school themselves, preparing to become teachers, people began to understand the value of what she offered. In March of 1879, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Zane was overjoyed, immediately becoming overprotective and trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. Catherine firmly told him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she had no intention of becoming an invalid. Matthew and Jacob were excited about the prospect of a sibling. They discussed names endlessly and argued about whether they wanted a brother or a sister. Catherine found their enthusiasm touching, though she did have to gently explain that the baby would not be able to play with them immediately after birth. She continued teaching through her pregnancy, finally stopping at the end of October when her due date approached. The school board had already hired a temporary teacher to cover her absence, a young woman from Santa Fe who had been trained by Catherine via letters. On November 15th, after a long but uncomplicated labor attended by Mary and the town's midwife, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Catherine's father, and he had Zane's gray eyes and Catherine's dark hair. Zane wept when he held his son for the first time, and Catherine understood. This baby represented new beginnings, hope, the future they were building together. Matthew and Jacob were awed by their tiny brother, handling him with exaggerated care and competing to be the first to make him smile. Catherine took 3 months away from teaching to recover and bond with Samuel. During that time, she did not stop being a teacher, though. She tutored Matthew in advanced mathematics and began teaching Jacob basic Latin. She also started offering Sunday afternoon lessons to mothers who wanted to learn to read, meeting them at the ranch with babies and toddlers playing at their feet, while their mothers painstakingly learned their letters. Returning to school in February was bittersweet. Catherine missed Samuel during her teaching days, though Zane brought him to town so she could nurse him at midday. But being back in the classroom, watching young minds expand and grow, fed something essential in her soul. The years flowed past, each bringing changes and growth. In 1880, the railroad reached Roswell, connecting the isolated town to the wider world. Catherine organized a celebration and used the opportunity to teach her students about engineering and economics. Matthew, now 12, was fascinated by the trains and spent weeks studying their mechanics. In 1881, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth. The birth was harder than Samuel's had been, and for a frightening few hours the midwife worried they might lose Catherine. But she fought through, determined to meet her daughters. Zane did not leave her side, holding her hand and whispering prayers and promises. The twins were tiny but fierce, with Catherine's stubborn temperament and Zane's strong will. Matthew, Jacob, and Samuel adored them, though Samuel now too was slightly disappointed they could not immediately play with him. The house became louder, more chaotic, filled with laughter and crying and the constant noise of a large family. Catherine reduced her teaching to 2 days a week, unable to keep up the previous pace with infant twins. But she did not stop entirely. Teaching was too much a part of who she was. Instead, she began writing a curriculum that could be used by other frontier teachers, sharing her methods and materials through letters, and eventually through a small book published by a press in Santa Fe. Her book, Education on the Frontier, Practical Methods for Teaching in One-Room Schools, became surprisingly popular, spreading throughout the territories. Teachers from Colorado to Arizona wrote to her asking for advice, sharing their own challenges and successes. Catherine found herself at the center of an informal network of frontier educators, all working to bring quality education to isolated communities. Matthew graduated from Catherine's school in 1883 at age 14, having completed work equivalent to most high school students. He wanted to continue his education, but the nearest institution that could challenge him was in Santa Fe, 170 miles away. Catherine and Zane wrestled with the decision, neither wanting to send their son away but both knowing he needed more than they could provide. In the end, they found a solution. A professor at the College of Santa Fe agreed to accept Matthew as a student at age 15, boarding with the professor's family. It was expensive and meant seeing their eldest son only during summers and holidays, but it was the right choice. Saying goodbye to Matthew that September was one of the hardest things Catherine had ever done. She held him tight, this boy who was not born from her body but was completely hers in every way that mattered. "Study hard," she whispered. "Make us proud, but more importantly, make yourself proud." "I will, Mother," Matthew said, using the name he had called her since their wedding night. "Thank you for teaching me that the world is bigger than I ever imagined." Jacob struggled with his brother's absence but channeled his feelings into music, composing increasingly complex pieces. At 12, he was already being asked to play at town gatherings, and people came from miles around to hear the boy with the remarkable voice. Samuel, at age 4, followed Catherine around constantly, asking endless questions about everything. Emma and Elizabeth, at 2, were inseparable, speaking in a private language only they understood. The house was never quiet, never still, always filled with life. In the spring of 1884, Catherine received a letter that changed everything. A wealthy benefactor in Boston, impressed by her book on frontier education, wanted to fund a proper school building in Roswell, complete with multiple rooms, modern equipment, and housing for multiple teachers. The donation was substantial, enough to transform education in the entire region. The town had grown significantly since Catherine's arrival 6 years earlier. The population had tripled, and businesses were thriving. People were building permanent homes, investing in the community's future. A real school was exactly what was needed. Catherine threw herself into planning. She designed a curriculum that would take students from primer through high school. She recruited teachers, training them in her methods. She organized fundraising to supplement the Boston donation, getting every family in town to contribute something, even if just labor or materials. Construction began in the summer of 1884, and by fall, the building stood proud. 2 stories of solid adobe and timber with 4 classrooms, a library, a laboratory for scientific study, and an auditorium for performances and town meetings. It was the finest structure in Roswell, a testament to what could be accomplished when a community committed to education. The dedication ceremony was held on a brilliant October afternoon. The territorial governor attended, along with education officials from across New Mexico. Catherine was asked to speak, and she stood before the assembled crowd with Zane and their children in the front row, Matthew home from college for the occasion. 6 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd, I arrived in Roswell with a trunk full of books and a head full of ideas. I was told I was too educated for frontier life, that my learning would be wasted here. But a wise man proved them wrong. She looked at Zane, seeing the love and pride shining in his eyes. He said, "Teach our children everything you know." He understood that education is not a luxury for the privileged few, but a necessity for everyone who wants to build a better future. This building stands as proof that he was right. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, people lined up to thank her, to tell her stories of how she had changed their lives or their children's lives. Former students, now adults, introduced her to their own children. Mothers who had learned to read in her Sunday classes showed her letters they had written. That night, exhausted but happy, Catherine sat on the porch of the ranch house with Zane, watching the stars emerge. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you asked me to teach Matthew and Jacob, did you imagine it would lead to all this?" Zane pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "I imagined you. I imagined loving you. The rest is just details." "Important details," Catherine laughed. "A school, 5 children, a whole community transformed. True. But none of it would matter without you beside me." He kissed her temple gently. "You were never too educated for this life, Catherine. You were exactly educated enough to know that education belongs everywhere, even here at the edge of civilization." "Not the edge anymore," Catherine said, gesturing at the distant lights of the growing town. "We are becoming civilization." The years continued their march. Matthew graduated from the College of Santa Fe with honors, and went on to study astronomy at a university in California, fulfilling his childhood dream of studying the stars. Jacob attended a music conservatory in St. Louis, his talent recognized and nurtured. Samuel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved ranching and mathematics equally, helping his father run the now substantial operation with scientific precision. Emma and Elizabeth, inseparable as ever, both showed aptitude for teaching, often helping Catherine in the school. In 1888, Catherine gave birth to their 6th child, another boy they named Thomas after her brother who had died young. At 33, Catherine finally decided this would be her last pregnancy. 6 children were more than enough, and she wanted to dedicate more energy to her teaching and educational advocacy. The school thrived under Catherine's leadership. They now employed 6 teachers, serving over 80 students. The curriculum included Latin, advanced mathematics, natural sciences, history, geography, literature, and music. Students who graduated from the Roswell School were accepted at universities across the country, a source of immense pride for the community. But Catherine's proudest achievement was not academic. It was the way education had woven itself into the fabric of the town. Parents valued learning. The library was always full. Town meetings involved thoughtful debate rather than shouting matches. Contracts were carefully read before signing. Women knew their legal rights. Children grew up believing they could be anything they wanted. In 1890, Zane was elected mayor of Roswell, running on a platform of continued investment in education and infrastructure. He served 2 terms, working closely with Catherine to ensure every child in the area had access to quality schooling, even establishing satellite schools in more remote areas. Their children grew and flourished. Matthew married a fellow astronomer, and they moved to Arizona, where he worked at an observatory studying the night sky he had first wondered about as a 9-year-old boy. Jacob became a successful composer and performer, traveling extensively but always coming home to Roswell for holidays, bringing music and joy wherever he went. Samuel took over day-to-day operations of the ranch, implementing innovative techniques and expanding the operation while maintaining his father's values of fair treatment for workers and sustainable practices. Emma and Elizabeth both became teachers, working alongside their mother at the Roswell school. They brought fresh energy and new ideas, challenging Catherine in the best possible ways. Thomas, the youngest, showed early signs of following his older brother into ranching, but with an additional interest in veterinary science that Catherine encouraged by ordering books on animal anatomy and medicine. In the spring of 1895, Catherine stood before the graduating class of the Roswell High School, watching 23 young men and women receive their diplomas. Among them were children of the students she had taught in that first rough classroom 17 years earlier. Education had become generational, woven into families' identities. "You are the proof," she told them, "that education transforms not just individuals but entire communities. You are ranchers and business people, yes, but you are also scholars and thinkers. You will build this territory into a state, and you will do so with wisdom and knowledge guiding your hands. I could not be more proud." After the ceremony, as families celebrated and graduates made plans for their futures, Zane found Catherine standing alone, watching the festivities with tears streaming down her face. "Happy tears?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The happiest," she confirmed. "Do you remember what the school board said at my first meeting? That I was too educated for this place? I remember. I also remember thinking they were idiots." Catherine laughed through her tears. "You believed in me before I believed in myself. You saw what was possible when everyone else saw only obstacles." "I saw you," Zane said simply, "and I knew that anything you set your mind to would succeed, though I will admit I did not anticipate quite how spectacularly you would prove them wrong." They stood together, watching their community celebrate, their children among the crowd, living testaments to the life they had built together. Catherine thought about that young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 17 years earlier, clutching her books and terrified she had made a mistake. That woman had been transformed by this place, and these people as much as she had transformed them. "I love you," she said, turning in Zane's arms to face him. "Thank you for asking me to teach your children everything I knew. It gave me everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you too," Zane replied, kissing her softly. "And for the record, you taught them far more than I ever imagined possible. But the most important lesson came from both of us together. That love and learning go hand in hand, that a good life is built on both passion and knowledge, that family is about choosing each other every single day." As the sun set over Roswell, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Catherine and Zane walked home hand in hand. Their house, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, glowed with lamplight. They could hear laughter inside, their children and grandchildren gathering for the celebration dinner. "Ready?" Zane asked at the door. Catherine smiled, thinking of all the years behind them and all the years still to come. "Always." They entered together, swept up immediately in the chaos and joy of family. Matthew and his wife were there from Arizona, Jacob had brought his fiancée, a talented pianist he had met on tour, and all the younger children clamored for attention. The table groaned under the weight of food, and the conversation flowed like wine. After dinner, Matthew asked Catherine to tell the story again, the story they had heard countless times but never tired of. "Tell us about when you first arrived, Mother." "About the school board meeting and Papa defending you," Catherine laughed. "You know that story by heart, Matthew, but we never tire of hearing it," Emma chimed in. "How you refused to be limited, how you taught us that education matters." So Catherine told the story again, with Zane interjecting corrections and additions. She told them about her terror that first day of teaching, about the moment she decided to begin with wonder rather than discipline, about the satisfaction of watching young minds expand and grow. "The truth is," she concluded, "I came here thinking I would teach, but this place taught me far more. It taught me that education is not about degrees or credentials or proving how smart you are. It is about curiosity, about the willingness to keep learning no matter how old you get, about passing knowledge forward to the next generation. Every person I met here educated me in some way. Your father taught me about patience and practical wisdom. Mary Henderson taught me about resilience. The Apache women taught me about desert medicine. My students taught me about creativity and determination. Education flows in all directions if we are humble enough to receive it." "But you started it, Mother," Samuel said seriously. "You showed us it was possible." "No," Catherine corrected gently. "Your father started it when he said, 'Teach our children everything you know.' He had the vision. I just had the tools to implement it." Zane shook his head, smiling. "We did it together. That is the point. Neither of us could have accomplished this alone. But together, we built something that will outlast us both." As the evening wore on and the younger children fell asleep in laps and corners, Catherine found herself on the porch again, her favorite spot for reflection. Zane joined her with 2 cups of coffee, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars. "Matthew will be presenting his research at a conference in Washington next year," Zane said finally. "Our son, the astronomer, sharing his findings with the scientific community." "And Jacob's symphony premieres in New York in the fall," Catherine added. "Our son, the composer, whose work will be performed by a major orchestra." Samuel increased the ranch's efficiency by 30% this year using techniques he read about in agricultural journals. Emma and Elizabeth just published an article on innovative teaching methods in a national education journal. Thomas is only 10, but he is already reading veterinary texts at a college level. They looked at each other and laughed. "We are bragging about our children," Catherine said. "We have become insufferable parents." "We have earned the right," Zane replied. "We raised them well. More importantly, we taught them to be curious, to be kind, to keep learning. They will do good in this world." "Because you said, 'Teach our children everything you know,'" Catherine said softly. "Because you valued education when it would have been easier not to. Because you believed in me when I had given plenty of people reasons to doubt. And because you came to this dusty frontier town with your books and your dreams and your absolute refusal to accept that anyone was unteachable. You transformed this place, Catherine. You transformed me." "We transformed each other," Catherine insisted. "That is what love does. It makes us better than we could be alone." In 1900, New Mexico celebrated the turn of the century with grand festivities. Roswell had become a thriving town of over 3,000 people, with electricity, telephone lines, and regular train service. The school now employed 15 teachers and served 250 students in a new, even larger building. A teachers' college had been established, training educators for rural communities across the territory. Catherine, at 45, had become a respected voice in education policy, consulted by territorial officials, and invited to speak at conferences across the Southwest. But she never lost touch with the classroom. She still taught advanced Latin and mathematics to her brightest students, refusing to become an administrator who had forgotten what teaching actually meant. Zane, at 52, had handed over most of the ranch operations to Samuel, but remained active in town governance and business. He and Catherine were pillars of the community, their marriage held up as an example of partnership and mutual respect. They were often seen walking together in the evenings, holding hands like newlyweds, still deeply in love after 22 years of marriage. Their grandchildren were beginning to arrive. Matthew and his wife had 2 children, and Jacob's wife was expecting their first. The house that had been built for a widower and his 2 sons now echoed with the laughter of multiple generations, a testament to the family they had created. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, the town threw a celebration in their honor. Nearly everyone in Roswell attended, along with friends and former students from across the territory. The testimonials went on for hours, people sharing stories of how Catherine and Zane had changed their lives. A former student, now a successful lawyer, spoke of how Catherine had taught him that intelligence was not determined by background. A woman who had learned to read in Catherine's Sunday class told how it had allowed her to read her children bedtime stories. A rancher credited Zane's example of valuing education with his decision to send his own sons to university. When it was Catherine's turn to speak, she stood with Zane beside her, their hands clasped. 25 years ago, I was told I was too educated for frontier life. Today, I stand before you and say that there is no such thing as too educated. Education is not a burden or a luxury. It is the foundation of everything we build together. It is how we move from surviving to thriving, from isolation to community, from ignorance to understanding. She looked at Zane, her voice softening. But education alone is not enough. It must be paired with love, with compassion, with the willingness to see potential in every person. My husband taught me that. He saw potential in his sons when others might have been content to raise them as simple ranch hands. He saw potential in me when I was a stranger with too many books and impractical dreams. He taught me that the frontier is not a place where learning comes to die, but a place where it can flourish in new and unexpected ways. Zane stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd. Catherine likes to credit me, but the truth is simpler. I asked her to teach my children. She taught our whole community. I asked her to share what she knew. She created a system that will educate generations. I asked her to marry me. She gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. He turned to her, speaking now just to her though everyone could hear. You were never too educated, my love. The world was not educated enough to recognize what you offered. Thank you for proving them all wrong. Thank you for choosing this life, this place, me. Catherine kissed him there in front of everyone, not caring about propriety or dignity, just expressing the love that had sustained them through challenges and changes, through the building of a family and a community. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories. Their children performed a song Jacob had written specially for the occasion, a beautiful piece about 2 people who built a life together through love and learning. There was not a dry eye in the room. As Catherine and Zane finally headed home in the early hours of the morning, riding in a fine buggy that was a far cry from the rough wagon of their courtship, Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. I never imagined this, she said quietly. When I stepped off that stagecoach 25 years ago, terrified and alone, I could not have imagined this life, this love, this community. "Are you happy?" Zane asked. "More than I ever dreamed possible. You—" "Every single day," he confirmed. "Even the hard days, the days when we struggled or argued or faced setbacks. Every day with you has been a gift." They rode in silence for a while, the stars brilliant overhead, the same stars Matthew now studied professionally, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, all the moments that had woven together into a life. "You ever regret it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Marrying someone who could not just be a rancher's wife, who had to keep teaching, who filled our house with books and debates and constant questions." Zane stopped the buggy and turned to face her fully. "Catherine Zimmerman, listen to me carefully. I did not want a rancher's wife. I wanted a partner, an equal, someone who would challenge me and inspire me and show our children that life offers endless possibilities. I got exactly what I wanted, and not a single day have I regretted it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and our marriage is the greatest success of my life." Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. After 25 years, he could still make her cry with the depth of his love. "I love you, Zane Zimmerman. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me that first day. Thank you for defending me to the school board. Thank you for asking me to teach our children everything I knew. It gave me permission to be fully myself." "You gave yourself that permission," Zane said, wiping away her tears. "I just made sure nobody tried to stop you." They continued home, and the years continued to unfold. Catherine taught until she was 63 years old, finally retiring in 1918 when the Great War ended and the world seemed on the cusp of tremendous change. By then, her influence had spread far beyond Roswell. Teachers she had trained worked across the Southwest. Her teaching methods were standard curriculum in normal schools. Her book had been revised and expanded into a comprehensive guide used throughout rural America. Zane remained her partner in everything, supporting her work while managing their ranch and investments. They traveled together, visiting their children and grandchildren, seeing the country that had grown and changed so dramatically since their youth. They attended Matthew's lectures on astronomy and Jacob's symphony performances. They watched Samuel expand the ranch into one of the most successful operations in New Mexico. They celebrated as Emma and Elizabeth each became principals of their own schools. They supported Thomas as he opened a veterinary practice that served ranchers across 3 counties. In 1920, when women finally won the right to vote, Catherine cast her ballot with tears of joy streaming down her face. She was 65 years old and had fought for this moment for decades. Zane stood beside her, proud and supportive as always. "You voted for education before it was popular," he told her. "You voted for women's capabilities before it was acceptable. You voted for possibility before it was fashionable. This is just the world finally catching up to you." They spent their later years in the ranch house, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. The house had been expanded and modernized, but it retained its essential character: warm, welcoming, filled with books and music and laughter. Catherine continued to read voraciously, keeping up with advances in science and philosophy, always learning. Zane learned alongside her, the student he had always been at heart. They took walks every evening, weather permitting, talking about everything and nothing, still finding new things to discuss after nearly 50 years together. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the entire family gathered: 6 children, 19 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with people coming from across the country to honor the couple who had built a legacy of love and learning. Matthew, now 59 and a distinguished professor, gave the toast. My father once told a schoolteacher, "Teach our children everything you know." That simple request changed not just our family, but an entire region. Mother did not just teach us facts and figures. She taught us to think, to question, to dream. She taught us that education is not about memorization, but about transformation. And through her example, through the partnership she built with our father, she taught us that love and learning are not separate things but two parts of the same whole. He raised his glass. To Catherine and Zane Zimmerman, who proved that the frontier was never too small for big ideas, that love can flourish in the harshest conditions, and that two people who truly see and value each other can build something that outlasts them both. May we all be so fortunate, so brave, and so wise. Catherine and Zane sat at the head of the table, holding hands as they had for 50 years, their hair white now, but their eyes still bright with love and life. They looked at their assembled family, at the legacy they had created, and knew that they had lived well. "Are you satisfied?" Zane whispered to Catherine as the celebration continued around them. "Completely," she whispered back. "We built something good, Zane. Something that will continue long after we are gone." "We did," he agreed. "Together." They lived several more years, watching New Mexico finally achieve statehood in 1912, a moment Catherine had campaigned for and celebrated. They saw the advent of automobiles and radio, of airplanes and moving pictures. The world changed around them, but their love remained constant. Zane passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 83, with Catherine holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for teaching our children. Thank you for loving me." Catherine mourned deeply but did not break. She had been shaped by the frontier, made strong by challenges, and she carried on. She lived 4 more years, surrounded by family, still reading, still curious, still teaching anyone who would listen. When Catherine died in 1936 at the age of 81, she left behind a family of educators, scientists, artists, and business leaders. But more than that, she left behind a community transformed by her vision that education belonged to everyone, that learning was a lifelong pursuit, and that no one was ever too educated for anywhere. At her funeral, hundreds of people came to pay respects. Former students, now elderly themselves, shared stories of the teacher who had changed their lives. Teachers she had trained spoke of her methods and her inspiration. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together, a testament to the power of love and learning combined. Matthew read from one of Catherine's favorite poems, Tennyson's Ulysses. "I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch whereto gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move." Then he added his own words. "My mother was told she was too educated for frontier life. My father said, 'Teach our children everything you know.' That exchange, that moment of recognition between two people who saw possibility where others saw only limitation, changed everything. It changed our family. It changed Roswell. It changed New Mexico. And it changed everyone who was fortunate enough to learn from her or love her. She taught us that education is not about proving you are smarter than others, but about lifting everyone up together. She taught us that love means supporting each other's dreams, not constraining them. She taught us that the frontier, any frontier, is exactly where educated people belong, bringing light to places that desperately need it. He looked at his siblings, at the assembled crowd. We are her legacy. Not just her children and grandchildren, but everyone she taught, everyone she inspired, everyone who believed in education because she showed them its power. She was never too educated for this place. This place was blessed beyond measure to have her. And we were blessed beyond measure to love her and be loved by her. They buried Catherine beside Zane on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the town they had helped build, and the vast New Mexico sky stretching endlessly above. The headstone was simple. Catherine Walsh Zimmerman, 1855–1936. Teacher, wife, mother, she taught us everything she knew. But her true monument was not made of stone. It was the schools across New Mexico and beyond that used her methods. It was the teachers she had trained who trained others in turn. It was the students who became doctors and lawyers and teachers and business leaders, all carrying forward the belief that education matters, that learning never stops, that everyone deserves the chance to understand their world. It was the library in Roswell that bore her name, filled with books for anyone to read. It was the scholarship fund established in her honor that sent countless children to college. It was the elementary school and the high school and the community college that carried on her vision of education as transformation. Most of all, it was the family she and Zane had created together. A family bound not just by blood but by shared values of curiosity, compassion, and continuous learning. A family that spread across the country and eventually the world, but always traced its roots back to a dusty frontier town, where a woman with too many books met a cowboy with impossible dreams. And together, they proved that love and learning could flourish anywhere, if two people were brave enough to believe it possible. Their story became legend in Roswell, told and retold across generations. The educated woman who came west and the cowboy who valued knowledge. The partnership that transformed a community. The love that lasted 50 years and created a legacy that would endure far longer. And always at the heart of the story, those words that changed everything. Teach our children everything you know. Because Zane Zimmerman had understood, in a way that the men of the school board had not, that education was never wasted, that Catherine Walsh was not too educated for frontier life, but rather exactly educated enough to show everyone what was possible when knowledge and courage combined. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit the graves on the hill, still hear the stories, still carry forward the values that Catherine and Zane lived. Education matters. Love endures. And no one is ever too educated for anywhere, because the world needs people who believe in possibility, who see potential where others see only obstacles, who dare to dream that things can be better and then work to make those dreams reality. The frontier is long gone now, replaced by cities and highways and all the trappings of modern life. But the lesson remains, carved not in stone but in the hearts of everyone who learned from Catherine Zimmerman, who loved because Zane Zimmerman showed them how, who believed in education because two people proved it could transform everything. She was never too educated for frontier life. She was exactly what frontier life needed, what every life needs. Someone who believes in growth, in learning, in the power of knowledge paired with love to create something lasting and beautiful and true. And it all began with a cowboy who said, "Teach our children everything you know," and a teacher brave enough to do exactly that.